Hi, Dr. Raamy. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So when I was interested in doing this sort of philosophy thing, and then I was looking on the profiles at our University of Manchester,
Hmm.
where I can find someone who has expertise in these fields, and I think you were the first person I came across, and then I emailed you and you accepted. So thank you very much for accepting that. And
Pleasure.
just for our listeners and viewers, that your name is Dr. Raamy Majeed, and you're assistant professor lecturer here at University of Manchester in Department of Philosophy.
Hmm.
That's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
So can you give a little background of about your academic journey from where you did your studies and where have you worked for our audience to get a decent idea about the things?
Of course. So I'm from the Maldives originally,
Okay.
and I studied my undergrad in New Zealand at the University of Otago in
Okay.
Dunedin,
Okay.
which is right at the bottom of the South Island, if you know
Okay.
the
Yeah.
map of
Yeah.
New Zealand.
Yeah.
And then I did my master's there too.
Mm.
And then, so my master's was in the philosophy of music. Even though my background was in philosophy, it was more because I love music.
Okay.
And doing my master's on music, I got really interested in consciousness. So I
Mhm.
wanted to do a PhD on consciousness. So I was looking around and I ended up at the University of Sydney in Australia.
Okay.
And Australia has a very good philosophy of mind scene. So I did my PhD there, and half of the time, because at Sydney, one of the nice things is after 2 years of working there, you can sort of spend the next year or two elsewhere. So
Okay.
I went to visit NYU in
Mm.
New York. So I was living
Okay.
in New York at the end of my PhD. And then afterwards,
So you were working there as well in
I was visiting,
visiting.
as
Okay.
a kind of a visiting PhD student.
Okay.
And then I worked at quite a lot of places afterwards, just on teaching lectureships and things like that. So I
Okay.
worked back at Otago University in New Zealand. I worked in America at a university called Lehigh.
Okay.
I got a postdoc at Cambridge University here in the UK.
Okay.
And then my longest job before I moved here was at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. So I was there for about 4 years or so, and then finally arrived here 3 years ago. And so here I am, I
Okay.
guess.
So I mean, it's like you're coming back to UK because, as you mentioned, you were in Cambridge, and then
Yeah, I really like the scene here in the UK. I think it's not too big, but it's big enough that you can be intellectually immersed
okay.
in a culture. And I think because my specialization really is philosophy of mind.
Mm.
When I moved to New Zealand, the number of philosophers of mind in New Zealand went up from 1 to 2.
Okay.
So it was
Great.
intellectually a
Okay.
lonely place. So it's nice to be here, and you can it's easier to go to conferences in Europe and things like that.
Okay. So do you think like coming to UK in terms of your field, it is intellectually stimulating compared to what you experience in New Zealand because there was not enough, you would say,
For me, I don't want to put down this academic scene in New Zealand, but I
yeah,
think
like in general,
yeah.
non-UK country, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's more that so somewhere like New Zealand,
Yeah.
it's very big on moral and political philosophy, for example. But that's
Okay.
not what I
Okay.
do. So it's nice to be here just because there's more philosophers of mind, and maybe because I left the Maldives when I was 15, so I've kind of bounced around so many countries.
Yeah.
But I think the UK is a place that, despite its faults, I feel quite at home in, and there's
Yeah.
parts of the culture I really like.
Yeah. It's
So
very
it's nice to be
cosmopolitan.
here.
I mean, it's people all around the world here. So
Yeah, I think people on the whole are quite worldly, and I think I like to be in places where people look outwards, not
yeah.
inwards. And of course, these things come and go.
Yeah.
But I think you do feel like you're in, like, not the heart of Europe. That seems too grand, but I feel like as a non-European, being in Europe
Yeah.
is still very exciting.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. Okay, so that's being your background, as you mentioned. So quite interesting. Now coming to the main topic why we are here. So the term is philosophy. I mean, different parts of world, different philosopher, different definitions, different analysis. But starting with you, if you have to explain what is philosophy and why learning, studying philosophy is important.
I think that's the hardest thing, is to explain what philosophy is.
Okay.
A professor at Otago once told me when I was a student, philosophy is about arguing. And I don't think he meant confrontation. I think he
Yeah.
meant putting forward formal arguments.
Based on rationality?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you can put up. So the question was not really like I think these days everyone kind of has an opinion, and I think everyone thinks they have a right to be heard. And fine, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not interested in what people think. It's more, can you justify
Yeah.
your view? Do you have an argument for thinking
Mhm,
this?
mhm.
And I think philosophers are quite good at putting forward arguments, but also critiquing arguments. And I think that the difference between, I think, a field, I mean, there's no such thing as science grand, like that's too hard to define too. But if you compare something in the humanities with the sciences, what do? I think what I do is I don't conduct experiments, right? I'm not a scientist. I'm not trained in that way. But you can engage with scientific data, but you can also question the way it gets interpreted in certain kinds of experiments. So you can critique it. So my specialization, or one of my areas, is emotion.
Okay.
And I think, I mean, I don't like academics working in their silos. I think you have to do, or at least talk to people in other fields. And because I do emotion, it's very easy for me to reach out and talk to psychologists or neuroscience, or at least read a lot of work from those disciplines. But a common thing I see when I look at a psychology academic paper is there's the experiment, and then there's the sort of conclusion implication section. And often the psychologist will make really grand claims based on the data, and I can come and say, actually, here's the data, and there's 3 different conclusions you can take, and you've picked one without explaining why that's the preferred interpretation. So I can critique some of the interpretations of the data. So a lot of, I guess, what you do is you're sort of critiquing, but you're also trying to put forward positive arguments for another viewpoint. So I don't want to say it's like a negative enterprise.
Okay.
So I think it's more you're trying to, and I think when I think of a view, say, I don't know, I think emotions aren't purely socially constructed, for example. I want to present an argument for it, but then personally I want to see if I can critique my own argument. Does it hold up to scrutiny? That's what I think partly philosophy is about. It goes back to kind of the Socratic method, where you're trying to sort of think about why people think what they do, but then also see if you can sort of criticize it or critique it, just so that you might actually want to give up that idea in the end.
Okay, I get that, but being a scientist, there is a sort of confusion coming here. So when we do research in science, so if we have to evidence, then we have experiments, data based on that. But how a philosopher would evidence his arguments about regarding any point? So how do you do that?
I think a lot of it's to do with like anyone, including scientists or philosophers, will make mistakes in their reasoning.
Yeah.
So you can sort of pull people up on that and say, look, you've made this claim using the data, but your claim goes beyond the data, and how you get there's like a fallacious move that you might be making a false dichotomy, for example. So that's one thing a philosopher might come and say. You've said it's A or B, but actually that's a false dichotomy. There's a few other options on the table, and as a philosopher, you don't say option C or D is the right one, but you're just saying actually there's more options here than what you might think. So that's part of the philosophical evidence, might be just looking at reasoning strategies and seeing if that stands up. But another thing, which is not something I'm super into, but a lot of philosophers, I guess you start with folk wisdom or you start with intuition.
Okay.
And I don't think you take that as the end of it, but you take it as a start of inquiry. So philosophers work on time, and one thing that a lot of people think is, like, in everyday experience, it seems like time flows. I feel like time passes. So you start from there. It doesn't mean your intuition has to be the conclusion. It's more, you start from there, and then you think, is the intuition backed up by the latest science? And maybe I think what happens often in my experience is the science tells you certain kinds of views might be true, but it doesn't give you one answer to the question. So it's not like a direct, we ask the question. And
different interpretation, different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And even with, so I think from memory, there was this thing about whether special relativity in physics disproves certain views of time and proves certain other views, but it's never that simple as just plugging in a scientific theory. It's more even within the theory, you might say, well, actually, there's a few different interpretations we can take from this. So I think ultimately we want to understand the way the world works, right?
Yeah.
Any sort of academic discipline. And to me, there's like a give and take between the different disciplines, and you sort of ultimately we all reach hopefully a slightly more accurate representation of the world together. That's the broad
Okay.
aim.
Okay. Yeah, that's fairly makes sense. When I was reading the definition of philosophy, one thing which I came across, so it was mentioned that philosophy is the mother of science.
Hmm.
So, and what argument that the book which I was reading was putting across that when the light bulb was invented, so whoever invented it, so before that, that thought of realizing and acknowledging the darkness, and then acknowledging that from moving from darkness to light,
Hmm.
that's philosophy. And then you start developing the idea of how you can do, and you can bring science into that.
Yeah.
So do you agree with that or not, that philosophy could be a mother of science because all the inventions comes from the philosophical idea, and then people put it across and then invent things?
I mean, I think it's a beautiful metaphor.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure I agree, but I mean, I'd like to agree as a philosopher. But I think if you look at these things historically, we didn't have those divisions, right? If you look at someone like Descartes, who is, I think, one of the greatest philosophers of mind, he was also a brilliant mathematician.
Yeah.
You would also, I think, arguably consider him a scientist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think he made those distinctions. And I think perhaps with specialization, not just of area, but of methodology, now we have these divisions, right? So I would say I'm not a psychologist because I don't do experiments, but a lot of the questions I'm asking overlap with the questions that I think psychologists working on emotion ask as well. So I think personally, as someone who does interdisciplinary work, when I talk to psychologists, they think my work's too philosophical. When I talk to philosophers, they think it's too sciencey, right? So maybe I'm kind of annoying everyone, but I think that's probably a good thing because I think there's a lot to be said for maybe kind of working in between those different areas. And because I work in between those areas, I don't really see too much a distinction intellectually between some of these fields, besides like who funds you and what do you actually do and things like that. So I do think I see why someone might say philosophy is the mother of science, because a lot of these early questions historically were philosophical, and then
Science started proving things,
Yeah.
bits and pieces.
yeah, but I think that's partly because what we think of science now wasn't around at that point, right? So
It's
someone
very
like,
new to human civilization.
I mean, a lot of these disciplines we now think of as kind of enriched are incredibly new in the grand scheme of things, right? So like someone like, I think, Plato asking these questions, writing these dialogues, science wasn't around for him to kind of do it. So so it's not clear if we should kind of make these distinctions retrospectively, I think. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So do you think reading philosophy help you fight with the fear of life? I mean, when people say that it's easy your life, the way you live, because now your fears are less, because at least you know that you don't know anything. So that's idea you get with philosophy. When you start reading philosophy, then you get this idea, and it helps you to live your life without fear.
I want to know more about the fear of life.
See, people have apprehensions about a lot of things, about their achievements not meeting their goals and everything. But then the realization of this thought that, is it worthwhile for my happiness or not? Then they get the essence of those things, that achieving these materialistic things won't add any meaningful contribution to my mental well-being, stuff like that. So reading philosophy eases those things out and clears the cloud that you might be after something which might feels you that this will give you happiness or satisfaction, whatever, but actually it may not be.
Yeah. I think my sort of honest answer is I know a lot of philosophers and they all seem quite miserable or not any happier than anyone else I know. Okay. But I think you're pushing on something interesting, which is, there's this kind of philosophical idea of existential dread that we have of kind of striving for meaning, and maybe looking at philosophers, what they've said, maybe it kind of speaks to that angst or fear, but then I don't think there's an easy solution within philosophy either. But I think you're also asking an interesting question to me, in the sense that there's people who study what happiness is, and perhaps more broadly, to make it more philosophical, a lot of philosophers, I mean, at least as far back as the Greeks, probably earlier, I'd imagine, were interested in this question: what constitutes a good life?
Okay.
Right. And I think ultimately that's something, whether directly or indirectly, most of us, as in people, care about. Like, what's a worthwhile life to you? What's a worthwhile life to me? What's the kind of life you think is worth living?
Yeah.
And I think that is a deeply philosophical question. But again, I think it's a question that a lot of psychologists write about too. So what are the things that make us happy, for example? And some people might even think actually happiness is not the end goal, or at least it seems I mean, it's not my area, but some of the psychology that I've read, if you are trying to make yourself happy and striving for that, that's not going to make you happy. So there's certain kinds of things which make people happy. One of them, oddly enough, is workplace gossip. It's quite good for you, and also doing things for others. So that creates a sense of meaning. And I think a lot of the times there's meaning created by things that go beyond yourself. So if you're part of a community or religion or even music, if you're playing that with other people, there's something more than just you contained within yourself. And I think those things give you meaning and maybe indirectly give you happiness as well.
But again, isn't that the happiness which you mentioned, which varies from person to person, that again depends upon the societal connotations, like people coming from different backgrounds.
Sure.
So their expectations, their experience are different. So based on them, the happiness is different. So even if they follow, or at least they try to understand what people have said, their interpretation would be different, because that's always based on their personal biasness, and that depends upon their experience, education, society, everything. So their interpretation could be very different, and then trying to confront yourself whether I'm able to, like trying to bringing your rationality on those things and then trying to convince yourself would be a struggle for people.
I think so. I think it probably will be a struggle, but I think there's an important distinction to be made between what you think will make you happy and what will actually make you happy.
Okay.
And I think the latter is not something we are very good at knowing, right? Like I'm sure I have so many habits that don't make me happy, and there's probably a lot of habits that I roughly know that will make me happy because I know the data on them, but it's always a bit harder. So one of the things I think apparently is think of a hobby. So there's two things you could do today when you go home. You could go and watch Netflix for 3 hours before bedtime, or you might read a piece of literature or do a painting or something. I think the latter, it's hard to make that into a habit because it's so much easier just to go and sit on the couch and watch TV. But I think there's certain kinds of things, like whatever you're interested in, but if say painting, once you get into the habit, I think people are generally happier for doing something like that. That gives them more meaning than the kind of easier thing of scrolling on your phone on Instagram for a few hours. So I think those kinds of more I mean, I don't mean worthwhile in a kind of some things are better than others objectively, but I think what you might think gives you more meaning, those kinds of habits, I think, long-term foster happiness compared to the easier option, I think. So I think, and personally, I mean, I'm speaking for myself as much as anyone else, I think we're on the whole quite bad at judging what we think will make us happy. So, I mean, if someone came in and said, here's £1 billion, will this make you happy? I think, yes, please, like happily take that. But when you look at the data of people who won the lottery, for example, they get really miserable. And I think partly, I don't want to get too fine to it, but I think one of the issues is your lifestyle completely changes and you lose your close friends. And then people get quite weird with you with the money you have.
You lose yourself, like the kind of person you were earlier.
Exactly. And I think, I think it's a lot of people who kind of win the lottery, I think, get miserable, but also like I'm the same. I think I'll be the exception, right? Like I'll be really happy because I'll invest it in the right way. I'll buy these things, and I think that's not how happiness works.
Okay, that's great. So coming to the area of your expertise, but metaphysics. So before that, one small question. So, is there any ultimate truth?
I think there's a way objectively I think the way the world is,
Yeah.
and I think you say something true when you describe it more accurately, or the way it is. So
Yeah.
I do buy into truths. So I'm not a relativist, and I don't like this contemporary way of talking, and I don't think that's what people mean. But like
Okay.
my truth,
Yeah.
it's like, no, there's not my truth or Gaurav's truth.
Yeah.
It's just something's true or not.
Yeah.
Something's true or false. I
Yeah.
think so. If I say it rained in Manchester this morning, which it did,
Yeah.
that's true, and so there's truth in that sense. And if I said it was sunny in Manchester this morning, it was false. That's false. It's not my truth. It's not relativist.
Yeah.
I think so. I do believe in objective facts. Now, whether we can attain them or know them is another. So there might be really interesting ways fundamentally the world is, which we might never answer, or something maybe in physics. So is our universe the only universe that exists? I think there's an answer to that question that's true or false, but we might never know that we know the right answer. So there's an epistemological question about how we get to the truth, but I think there are truths there.
Okay. I still have one point onto that about the thing you mentioned about if it rains for everyone, and that's the truth for everyone. Right.
I don't believe in truth for people. I think these things are true or false.
Okay.
So truth force seems to indicate that it's like you believe this, I believe this, and we seem to align. I don't think it matters what you believe. I think it's just whether something's the case or not. And if something's the case, like it rained in Manchester this morning, that's the case. So that's true. So it doesn't depend on consensus or anything. We can all believe that it was sunny. So suppose everyone in Manchester took this magical pill, and we were all hallucinating and we thought it was sunny. That's still not the case. It's still false. I think the point is,
So what I was putting across here, we saw the rain from our eyes, so we experience it through our senses. But what if we don't have that sense which can actually identify whether it was raining or not, because our senses are limited. So that could be true for the common people who have common senses, but suppose someone comes there with some extra senses, and then that person cannot identify whether it's raining or not. So then that truth might not be relevant or true to everyone.
But I think it would still be true. It would still be the case. It's just that person doesn't know it, right? So there's a lot of sounds that, for example, dogs can hear that we can't hear as humans. Say there's a sound like that emanating in this room right now. It would still be true that that sound is emanating. It's just that we don't have the right senses to pick it up. So I think that you're making a really interesting point, which is what's the relationship between our sensory capacities and attaining truth. But I think to me there's still an objective. I'm not an idealist, so I think there's an objective reality. It's just maybe we aren't often that good at grasping it. And I think, so I was talking to some people yesterday about this. And I think it's more of a pro-science view than a pro-philosophy view. So I think philosophers, I don't mean to speak for every philosopher, but have a habit of thinking our senses tell us what's true. So, we are very good at looking at the world and seeing things the way they are. But I think a lot of scientists who work on perception think our perceptual faculties aren't evolved to describe the world accurately. They're evolved to make us survive and pass on our genes. So vision, seeing, I see, what's around me, but the point of my being able to see is so I can move around the world. It's not because I need to know how the world is accurately. So I do think there's this important gap between what our senses can tell us and what's true. But I think there's still something true out there. It's just whether you can attain it or grasp it or not, I think. And maybe the word truth here is maybe used nowadays too colloquially in slightly different ways, but I still think there's a objective way the world is. There's things which, there's like your phone at the moment is on the table, and I think I can refuse to accept that, but it's still true that it's on the table. That's my point.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, again, before moving to metaphysics topic, because I'm really enjoying this conversation, and then I have one more question related to the same thing what we were talking about the philosophy, the definition and everything. this thing I always come across. So, all right, okay, now we know what the basics of philosophy of trying to figure out things based on rationality, having a dialogues and arguments
And reason.
and
Yeah.
reasonings, yeah.
Yeah.
But why most of these sort of conversation started happening around, we say, 6th century BC, but before that we don't have much evidence, or we don't know much people, but more data that we have of the philosophers all across the world. Even if we talk about from west, it's Greece, or if we talk about east, then most of the philosophers coming across talking about things started happening around 6th century BC, because before that we have, but it's very limited. But after 6th century BC, I mean, there's so many. Then so many things started happening in Greece, 6th, 4th century,
Yeah.
and all across the world. So do you think there is any reason for that?
So I see why you asked that, but I'm going to put pressure on the starting point.
Okay.
So the way I got taught philosophy was like that.
Yeah.
So philosophy starts in ancient Greece,
Yeah.
and then Socrates is the first real good philosopher,
Yeah.
and then it explodes from
Yeah.
there basically. And the more work I've done, it's not my area, but I don't think there's a start. So there's this idea. It's an exaggeration, I think,
Okay.
historically. But
Okay.
so what did the Greeks read? They read Egyptian philosophers. And what did those guys read or girls read? Something else, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be spheres of influence even in the ancient world. Maybe it's not as easy as emailing someone
Yeah.
or looking at a YouTube video. But I don't think, I'm very reluctant to accept that things just come out of nowhere from a vacuum, this idea of the genius by themselves, right? So I do think a lot of amazing philosophy got done in ancient Greece. And I think, I mean, I'm in the UK, I've been brought up in the philosophical sense from a Western perspective.
Yeah.
A lot of what I do, indirectly or directly, comes from those Greek thinkers. But I think super interesting things, I'm guessing, were happening in South Asia. India has a long history of thought, which I would argue is still philosophical, even though you might think it's more religion based. Like the Upanishads has a lot of like philosophical ideas.
Yeah, that's philosophical. Yeah, to be honest, that's philosophical.
Yeah, there's a lot of ancient Chinese philosophy that I think is also as rich, just to have different paradigms. And the little I know of African philosophy too, there's a lot that's there that's quite old. So my worry is if you just look at what the Greeks did and then define that as philosophy, then you're not going to find philosophy in other places because they might look a bit different.
Okay.
Right? So it's a bit like saying, here's what a house is. And you define that by what a house looks like in Manchester. And then you look to the ancient world and you see, well, these people had, houses made from mud, or in the Maldives, where I'm from, people use coral.
Yeah. Coral reefs,
Yeah, so if you look at a house made from coral and say that's not a house because it's not made from cement and concrete, that's a silly way, I think, of looking at it. So I would suggest you might not get Socratic dialogues in Chinese philosophy,
but it's still was there.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when I talk to students, they get quite distracted with this idea of, is it philosophy or is it not? And I think, who cares? Is it interesting? Are we interested in the question and the ideas? And I think definitely there's so much there in, I think, ancient India that's very philosophical. So I don't want to downplay the significance of Greek philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, and its contribution to especially the Western world. But I don't buy into this idea that everything started around the 6th century in that time. But that is the standard narrative. I'm just a bit skeptical of that.
I mean, why I was saying was it was quite predominant after that particular period. Before that, it was there, but it was less. Again, one argument I would say, I mean, I came across this thing. I don't know how true it is. I'll share with you, and then you can have your views on that. That the questions in philosophy, like, what's the reality, the truth, why we are here, the reason of existence and everything. These things can only happen when you're not hungry, when you have got food on your plate. So before, when we were hunters and gatherers, so the main aim was to collect food and everything. But over a period of time, let's say in 1000 BC, when the discovery of iron happened, then after that the agriculture boosted quite significantly, and then people started having decent amount of food in their plates. Before that, they all the focus was on for the food, because survival was the most important thing. But once now you have got things, you got your bread, now when you're sitting and chilling, now then you start thinking about why we are here. So this is again bit related to the some discoveries and the movement of these like civilizations, how they were transitioning from one phase to the other. And then when the scarcity of food became less, and then people started these dialogues of our existence. So do you think this is
No, I think that's a
relevant?
good point. I think both what I said and that can be true at the same time. So I was pushing on the idea that all of this philosophy was happening in ancient Greece at that point. But I think you're completely right that what we thought about probably changed dramatically. I mean, we never know, right? We don't know, but dramatically with say the invention of agriculture, and I think ultimately what's at issue to me is having the luxury of time to think about issues, right? And if you look at as a bigger issue even now, if you look at even like the early modern period, who are the great philosophers were people who were moneyed or had sponsors, and so they could sit, hang about doing science, doing scientific experiments, working out mathematical equations, asking deep questions about why we're here.
Exactly. This thing,
like
when I discuss with my friends, this always comes that all sorts of these revolutionary ideas comes from affluent people, because they had most of the luxuries of life, and then they started dealing about these things. It doesn't mostly come from downtrodden and those who have like sufferings or stuff like that.
Yeah, it's hard to. So I'm sympathetic to the idea, but also you have to reconcile that with like some of the kind of Greek philosophers who sort of shunned luxury and lived like poor people. So I definitely think historically I think it's more that there's probably a lot of people who ask deeply philosophical questions, but they never got to write them down, or people didn't pay attention to them. So I think what's I use this word reluctantly, universal, is there's some questions I think everyone or most people think about, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're working class, middle class, upper class, whatever. And it's just sometimes some people get more of a voice than other people. And I think, so I get to publish my work because I work at a university, and I know how to publish my work. So what I think reaches a little bit further than what someone down the road who isn't at a university and someone like you who's a YouTuber gets, a lot more than me, right? So I do think there's interesting questions that are not philosophical per se, but about how you communicate and how you get the reach that you do. And maybe I do think some people had more luxury to think about issues and more time, but also they had a more of a platform. Right.
Even if we look at the revolutions at universities level, most of the students, those who ask questions against the authority, I've seen this based on my personal experience and when I used to discuss with my friends. So most of those students also comes from affluent family. Very less students you would say in the front asking questions to the authorities who comes from the lower strata of the society, because for them they have seen that struggle in their family. So when they come to university, so they have seen that struggle, so they try to focus on their studies and stuff like that. But students, those who have seen the luxuries in their life, so when they come to university and when they see something wrong is happening, so they start questioning. I mean, this is based on my personal experience. It could be wrong, but anyways, these things come sometimes when we discuss with our friends. Okay,
interesting. So I try not to look at my students in that way, but I'm guessing I wouldn't be I'm sure I'll be very wrong in terms of judging how well off some of my students are compared to others. So I've not picked up on any, because my initial response would be, maybe if you're wealthy, you're just a bit more entitled, so you feel like you can push. But I would like to think I get probed. Students ask me pressing questions from all backgrounds. So it's not necessarily tied to.
So I was saying based on my student life experience, because that's what I've seen in my friends. And it's same. It's either even in India or in UK that I've seen.
Oh really?
So
okay, interesting.
That's why I came across that point. Anyways, coming to the the main topic that why we are here about is the very hugely, largely asked questions about metaphysics. So please tell, like, what is metaphysics? Why it is so much talked about thing, and still so much definitions, explanation, still people don't know.
Yeah, I don't think, again, it's a bit like philosophy. There's not a non-contentious answer I can give to you about what metaphysics is. But to me, metaphysics basically asks general questions about the nature of things. So the first question you ask is, what exists?
Okay.
And then when you figure out what exists, the second question is, what's the nature of the things which exist? And I think, to me, historically, I don't think there was a distinction between physics, for example, and metaphysics. But one way to make the distinction, you might think these days, is to say physicists care about specific questions about the nature of things. So what's the nature of an atom? What's the nature of an electron? Whereas philosophers are interested in the answers to those questions, but are also interested in broader, more general questions about the nature of what exists. Is physical matter the only thing that exists, for example? And one thing is, so, you might be interested in the nature of quarks. So what's, you want to go more and more into the fundamental level, but I think a philosopher might ask, is there a fundamental level? So some people think it goes all the way down, it's infinitely, and other people think, no, there must be a fundamental level. But that's not a question that you can directly answer in physics. But I think physicists are also interested in that question. But to me, if you're a physicist but you ask that question, you're basically engaging in metaphysics, because you're asking something that can't be just proved by an experiment. I think that's, so that you're asking very general questions.
That's beyond physics.
So just to give two examples would be, like, does time exist? That would be a metaphysical question. And the same way, does God exist? There would be a metaphysical question. So because these very general questions about what exists and their nature are by their nature very general, like I sound like a Dr. Seuss cartoon, but it's you're not going to give can't find easy answers to those questions, right? So I think those questions keep nagging at us, and probably will till we die as a species. I think.
Okay, so talking about metaphysics, so why this one particular thing, consciousness, is so important when we talk about metaphysics, and I think your expertise is as well from the on this consciousness of mind.
A little bit,
yeah. So maybe if you can explain what exactly is consciousness, how it is different from human body.
So the kind of consciousness I think that philosophers care about, and I think what most people care about, is what we call phenomenal consciousness. So that's basically subjective experience, what it's like for you to experience certain things. So what it's like for Raamy to taste coffee, for Gaurav to feel the sand on his feet. So it's the subjective experience part. And I think by consciousness, people mean many different things. And I think the same within the science of the mind too. So sometimes people mean access to things. So can you access, or can you have this information? Are you aware of it? So within psychology, you might say, you're conscious of this because you can verbally tell me that you're conscious. So within an experiment, verbal report is seen as a sign of consciousness. But of course, that can't be the whole story, because some people don't have verbal capacity, but they're still conscious. They have subjective experiences. So someone who never learned how to speak any language would, I'm guessing, still have a rich inner life. That would be their consciousness. So it's basically just subjectively how we experience the world. And you had a second part to your question, which is, how does it differ from the body, for example?
Yeah, because is it the body or is it the consciousness?
So that's one of the big questions within philosophy of mind, is how does, and it goes back to Descartes, but probably goes back early and probably found in other cultures too, is how does the mind relate to the body? So historically that was the mind-body problem, and these days people are interested in how does consciousness relate to the brain, and I would, to lay my cards on the table, I think it's the mind is embodied. So I think the mind is created by your brain, but also your body. So if you take those two things together, I think that explains, in theory at least, everything about the mind, and including consciousness. So I I don't think we have a good scientific account of consciousness just yet, but hypothetically, if science could be completed, which it never will, as you know, as a scientist, but if you could complete it, I think you'd understand the mind and including consciousness within a scientific picture. So I'm kind of, in one sense, optimistic. Not that I think we'll come up with a good scientific explanation, but I'm a bit skeptical, or very skeptical, of the other view, which is there's this kind of supernatural thing called consciousness that's kind of free flowing and somehow relates to the body, but it's a separate thing. I don't think it's a separate thing. So my view would be described as being physicalist in philosophy of mind. So I think everything is ultimately physical in nature, including consciousness. But the trick is, and we probably can appreciate the challenge of this, is how do you explain something subjective in an objective way, which is what neuroscientists will be studying. So we can find correlations relatively easily these days. So you can put me in a brain scan and figure out this part of my brain lights up when I taste coffee, and this part lights up when I have water. So that's okay. So David Chalmers, who works on consciousness, he's a philosopher of mind. So he calls that the easy problem of consciousness. And it's not easy, but it's we know how to do it, which is we can find correlations. The hard problem is explaining why those physical things bring about those conscious experiences. So why is it that this part of my brain, when it's activated, gives me the taste of coffee, and this other part gives me the taste of water? And I don't mean to simplify, because of course it's never just one part. There's neural circuits and things like that. But why does this circuit bring about this experience, and this other circuit bring about this other experience? And you can't, there's no test that gives you an answer to that question. The test just tells you this part is relevant for this experience, this part's relevant for this other experience. But why does this particular set of neurons firing, why does that give rise to the sensation of coffee? That's the part of the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay, so would you say there is consciousness? Consciousness can only be there if there is a brain?
Yeah, or something like a brain, I think. So, and I think you need a body too. That would be, if you want to have human-like experiences, I think you would need a brain plus a body, because often it's the body, and including your eyes as well, your face, it's sending information to the brain, right? So if the brain wasn't receiving any information, I don't think the brain would have much of a consciousness.
So I have one question here. It could be totally wrong. It doesn't make sense, but I would like to put across here. Computers, they do reasonings, they do mathematical equations. And if we talk about even AI, we'll not go much detail into AI, but that would be a very different subject. But even they are doing that thinking, but would you say they have consciousness?
I wouldn't say they had phenomenal consciousness. So, I mean, it does really relate to AI too, and a lot of philosophers of mind do work on AI these days. And so I would argue that even contemporary AI, and who knows what's going to happen in the next few years, it's doing something which seems very much like reasoning. I'm okay to say it's reasoning, because it's not clear that you're doing anything more special when you're reasoning too. But does it have subjective experiences? So does it have consciousness in that particular sense? I doubt it, because I think the subjective feeling or the experience, or even emotions, they come from having a brain, but they also come from having a body. So I don't think you'd have emotions if you didn't have a body, because your emotions come from your brain interpreting changes in your body, but also then sending signals back to your body too.
So are you saying a person in coma whose body is not working will not experience any emotion?
I don't know, because it's not that the body is not completely not working, right? So they might have some subliminal or lower level emotional process. I don't know, but happening. So, but they're still embodied, right? So if you, it's not like their head's been chopped off. So I think when we talk about AI, artificial intelligence, I think part of the issue is we've as a species, we've never come up with a good definition of what intelligence is. And if you just think the capacity to make inferences, I think arguably my phone does that these days. If I use ChatGPT, it's doing something that seems very similar to reasoning. And whether you want to call it human reasoning or human-like reasoning, that's up for grabs. But I don't think simply by having intelligence in this sense, it means that it has consciousness in that subjective sense that philosophers talk about. I think that's something else. Now, I'm not saying anything about whether in the future we can't have AI consciousness. Who knows? But I don't think the current systems have anything like consciousness. And I think partly because they're not receiving inputs from a body, right? They're not embodied.
Yeah.
So you could say they have beliefs. You could even say they have thoughts. I don't have a view on this, to be honest. And I think it's partly because those terms like beliefs and thoughts are quite loose and vague and open. But I would be very skeptical that they have consciousness. And just to add one more thing, when you Google like AI emotion, things will come up.
Yeah.
But I think what the AI experts are really doing is they're not saying artificial systems have emotions. They're creating AI systems that can detect human emotions. So
based on data.
Yeah, based on data, or even like you can develop a visual AI that detects human facial expressions. So that's detecting emotions. No one's saying the AI system has the emotion, and that's a very different thing. So as far as I can tell, I've not seen anything so far that seems to suggest that we are anywhere close to having AI consciousness or AI emotions.
Okay.
That's not to say we can't get intelligence. But I think the intelligence and consciousness are two different things. And you could have an intelligent system that isn't conscious. I think that's the key thing.
Okay. All right. I get that. Yeah. Coming back to the same questions of consciousness, then there is a word called soul. There's one word called spirit.
Yeah.
And then there is consciousness.
Yeah.
So there's very lot of misinterpretation of these things. So people sometimes confuse. So could you please explain and clarify? Are they same or different? How do they exist?
I mean, so I, as someone who's a physicalist, I think talking about the spirit is above my pay grade. so because I don't know what it is and I don't buy into it. So maybe more charitably, I think what I would say is something like the spirit or the soul. I think there's reasons why people buy into it. That's okay. I'm not against anyone buying into it, and there's various kinds of religious reasons to buy into it. These days people talk about spirituality and they make a distinction between that and religion, but I never know what they mean. And my sort of skeptical point would be, historically what people thought about consciousness maybe is kind of what people now call spirit. And then there's this other thing, which is the you inside your body that survives death. I'm skeptical that there's such a thing. I think my inexperience is my consciousness, and I think that's to do with my brain and my body and the information I receive from the physical world. So I don't feel the need to add something extra like a soul. But that's not to sort of dismiss people who buy into that idea. It's just I'm not moved by the reasons to posit a soul.
But don't you think maybe this two could be the same thing? It's just the interpretation, the consciousness and the soul.
Say more. How could they be the same thing?
I mean, obviously I don't have much knowledge about it. What I'm trying to say that people say soul, like let's say in South Asia, soul is something which is inside you, and that's what your thinking process. So your soul is basically the representation of your thinking process. What do you think?
Yeah.
And when you die, your soul doesn't die.
Yeah.
Just as the idea and the thoughts, they never die. So it still remains there, and then it can transform into something else or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's I was trying to relate.
Sure.
So maybe some part of the soul could have similarity with the idea of the consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I'm sort of rejecting.
Okay.
I think personally, I don't think anything survives. I think you're gone.
Okay.
And it's a harsh reality.
But if it's idea or thought, that still remains, right? Because even for Socrates, people say, though he died
the ideas.
He died drinking the poison,
Yeah.
but there was no poison because he actually never died, because Socrates was a person of idea. If there was a poison,
Yeah.
he would have died. But still we talk about him, so there was no poison. So it's the idea, isn't it?
So I think he died. so he died. His ideas live on, right?
Metaphorically, people say that, right?
Yeah, but
There
I think
was
it's
no
just
poison.
but it's a beautiful like metaphor or like a way of speaking. It's poetic, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's literally true,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, you can listen to an Elvis Presley record, but he's dead, right? That's so the idea lives on, or the piece of information lives on, but Elvis is not around.
Yeah.
So I think the same way, Socrates had such a big impact that his ideas got passed down, but the dude is dead,
Yeah.
right? That would be my my response. So I think so. Again, I it's such an important thing for a lot of people. So I'm not trying to say people shouldn't believe in this stuff, but I think personally, when you're dead, your beliefs and your conscious experiences, all of that goes.
Yeah.
It's just other people can remember you, and that's a beautiful thing. But I don't think there's this extra thing that survives, that changes into something. Like my body changes, it degrades and changes into worm food and things like that. So that's, to me, that's how you live. Your atoms continue to exist.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's this extra thing. And just to add one thing, I think these days, I think there's more a trend to talk about spirituality. And I never know what they mean. So sometimes I get asked, are you a spiritual person?
People have very different definition for spirituality.
I think ultimately, I mean, I used to think when I was a student, when people asked that, it just meant, did you eat nuts and did you do yoga, and would you have yogurt afterwards? And but I think nowadays, I think what people mean is, are you less materialistic? Do you like being in nature? And ultimately, my charitable interpretation would be, do you care about things above and beyond yourself?
Okay.
So in that way, yeah, I think we all want to be spiritual, but that doesn't mean there's this metaphysical inside thing called a soul that needs to be there. It's just more, are you a decent person? Do you like hiking? Do you care about the environment? Do you care about animals? I think those are ways you could be like spiritual in quotation marks, but that's separate from the metaphysical idea that there's this spirit that survives, I think.
Okay.
And you can have all the good stuff of spirituality without, I think, buying into a spirit. That's the takeaway, I think.
Okay. So like being a physicalist, as what you said, so the human body and the consciousness are one thing or together?
I think it's ultimately the same.
It's ultimately the same.
Yeah.
Then there is a theory of dualism.
Yeah.
A lot of philosophers at different parts of the world, they have talked about dualism, and some are against. So let's say if I talk about a philosopher from 6th century from India, Shankaracharya. So he has a philosophy, it's called Advaita Vedanta. So where he talks about there is no dualism, it's only one. And then he has given a definition of Brahman and Atman. So all the souls, all humans are the soul, which is directly connected to the Brahman. Brahman is, which is the single entity, which is the part of that energy, and we are connected with that. So whatever the consciousness that we have, we all the human have, is the same, and that is connected to the single entity. So there is no separation of a human body from its consciousness. It's together. It's same. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea. So I think I would put 3 ideas out there.
Okay.
So one is dualism within philosophy of mind. So Descartes was one of the most famous dualists, and the kind of idea is basically there's a mind and there's a body and they're separate. And they're
which philosopher you said?
Descartes.
Okay.
So I mean, he would be like kind of the person people think about when they think about dualism. Okay. I mean, there's other dualists too, of course.
Is it the one who said, I think because I am?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think therefore I am is kind of
yeah.
Descartes. Well, he said it in, I'm guessing, French.
Yeah,
or Latin.
Something. Yeah.
I think in Latin. But so there's. He thought the mind was a thinking thing, and the body is extended, and there was this difference between those two things. Yeah. So, like as a scientist, you study extended things which are extended in space and time.
Yeah.
but then there's thinking, the act of thinking, which he thought was a separate thing. So he's a dualist in that sense. There were two kinds of things. And sometimes people talk about, he was a substance dualist. So in theory, he thought there were two types of substances. But I think the charitable interpretation is he didn't think there was this physical stuff in the world, and then there's this kind of non-physical jelly-like or ether or whatever substance in the physical sense. He thought by substance, I think what he meant was there's this mental activity, and then there's things in the world which are extended in space and time, and there's somehow a separation between the mental activity and that. But the broader point is there's two kinds of things, and I don't know the kind of the Indian philosophy idea, but I've heard about it, and I think that's the idea, which is a different idea, which is, as I understand it, there's ultimately one consciousness, and your own consciousness, or the consciousness your pet cat has, is an extension of that one consciousness. So there's this one big consciousness, and every other consciousness is derived from that. And the third view is the sort of physicalist view, which is it's all just physical stuff, and your personal experiences just emerge when you get the right kind of neural activity. And I'm on the third,
the physicalist side.
Yeah, but I don't know much about the middle bit, the Indian philosophy idea, and I think it's a really interesting idea, and it relates a little bit. It's not the same. I don't want to equivocate between these two views, but it's quite similar to a view called panpsychism, which is the idea that everything's conscious. And so it doesn't posit like a god or a Brahman or anything like that, but the idea would be even atoms are conscious. And basically my consciousness comes from these little consciousness getting formed in the right way. I'm very skeptical about that idea, and the reason I'm skeptical is I think all the arguments against my view, physicalism, apply equally well to the panpsychist view. So the reason why you might not like physicalism is, how do you get consciousness from non-conscious things? So neurons, why do these neural patterns firing, which is ultimately a physical activity, how does that generate something above and beyond that activity which is conscious? And there's a gap, epistemic gap, a gap in our understanding of how does this thing relate to this other conscious activity, and that's kind of the hard problem. Now, if we can take that aside for now, think about the panpsychist view, which is everything's conscious. Now, on that view, my toothbrush is conscious. Now, that to me sounds insane, right? So does my toothbrush have a rich inner life? Does it have pain experiences when I rub it against my teeth? I doubt it. And a panpsychist would say you're misunderstanding the view. The toothbrush doesn't have your kind of consciousness. It has this other small micro,
which your sense might not be able to understand.
Yeah. And so say we have now my consciousness, but then these micro consciousness, and their view is you get my consciousness when you have the micro consciousness in the right way. But then what's the difference between that and the neural stuff being organized in the right way and bringing up consciousness? So I think there's a gap in our understanding in the physical picture, but I think there's the same or similar gap in understanding in the panpsychist view. How do you generate my human-like or human consciousness from these other micro consciousness? You're still building something big consciousness from these other things. So I think there's this question, how do you get there? And on the first view, if you can go back now, the substance dualist view, they don't need to answer that question because they're saying they're different. And so, I mean, there's a sense in which you need to explain how they relate and how they causally interact, and that's what Descartes was trying to do, so the mind-body interaction. But you're not trying to completely understand one thing in terms of the other, whereas on my picture, the physicalist picture, you're trying to understand the mind using physical matter, including the body and the brain, and activities of the body and the brain. So there's maybe I'm getting too philosophical here, but I think there's something important here that's philosophical and scientific, which is people like me, we're interested. ultimately it's a reductionist project. You're reducing the mind to the brain and the body, and like that's kind of what happens in science historically. At least that's the caricature, right? So when you come up with a new theory, you realize, well, we have, sound or lightning or thunder. Those kinds of things are reduced to particles moving around
Yeah.
in the right way, not just particles at random, but once you know the pattern, that's what lightning is. And a philosopher like me is interested in telling the same story about consciousness. So consciousness is basically the neurons firing in the right way, whereas if you're a panpsychist, you're skeptical about that picture, but you think somehow the proto-conscious experiences in the right way creates consciousness. So it's a similar reductive story, whereas the dualist is not reducing one thing to the other. They're a dualist precisely because fundamentally there's two types of things, whereas someone who's a monist thinks there's only one kind of thing, and I'm much more on that, which is the one kind of thing that exists is matter, whereas on I think the kind of ancient Indian idea and the panpsychist idea, it's also monist as one kind of thing, but the one kind of thing fundamentally is conscious, whereas I don't think that one kind of thing is fundamentally conscious. I think consciousness emerges at a macro level.
But okay, that's very interesting. I got intrigued at one point when you mentioned about the neurons thing in the human body. What if it's a hypothetical case? What if the person has died, or maybe his heart is not working? Heart is not working. Heart is not pumping. So the body is dead. But there is some neuron fires happening. There is some neuron movements. What would you say? There's still consciousness?
I don't know. So the body is...
Because people say that even after when the heart stop pumping, there is some... Because even we have seen in some animals, even they have died, there is muscular movement in their body.
Yeah.
That's because of the neurons which are still working.
Yeah.
So do you think that particular part still has consciousness?
I think it's a good question, but I don't know, because it depends on how much activity there is, right? So when you... I'm guessing even when biologically when a doctor says this person died at 10 a.m. this morning, there's still probably like a low level set of processes happening both in their body and their brain, right? But I don't think that's probably enough for conscious.
So where would you mark the line?
I think that
how much is required for the consciousness development?
I mean, I think it's a good question, but I think it's also a scientific question. So if we have the right theory of consciousness, we could then answer that question, because you might say the neurons have to do these things, fire in this way, and if it's not firing at that level, then you could say the person is not conscious. But I'm also guessing it'll come in like degrees realistically, right? So that's why, back to your coma question, you could say actually people in a coma have some sort of... Some people probably... It depends. I mean, we talk about coma as this one phenomenon,
in
but
general,
and so one of the experiments, you probably have heard about this. Historically, people thought people in comas don't have any sort of mental activity, right? Any kind of consciousness. And then they did these experiments which seemed to suggest that people actually were aware to an extent. And I think one thing was, so you could say to someone in a coma, imagine you're playing tennis, and they can't respond to you, they're in a coma. But it turns out the part of their brain that would be activated normally when they were playing tennis gets activated. Now, some people take that as demonstrating that that person is conscious, so they're hearing. But other people think actually it's like an automatic thing your brain is doing when it hears the word tennis. And that automatic thing might happen even if you were not conscious yourself. So some level of neural activity is happening because your brain is tuned to certain words that you learn. So for example, if you kept yelling fire to a coma victim, you might see a change in their brain activity, but it's not clear if that means they're conscious of you saying the word, or if the brain is just like simulating something on autopilot, as it were.
Coming back to the same thing which you was talking about, the being a physicalist. So I see there's one limitation, and please let me know if it's correct or wrong. Okay, so being a physicalist, you're saying that the consciousness coming from the human body, and if the body
From
is
the brain, yeah,
the brain,
yeah.
and then the consciousness is happening. But again, we have a limitation of sensation in our human brain body, right? So our experience, our consciousness is being governed by those particular sense that we have. But if you're trying to answer something which is beyond, I would say something which we can't analyze. Let's say we saw something, and then based on that we are saying that okay, I saw the something was happening, any incident we are reporting because we have seen that. But it's always not true because what you're saying may not be true in terms of there was some cloud, so you couldn't see it clearly. So even the sense that we have, they may not be always true in terms of interpretation. But what if something which is happening, our senses are not enough to process it? Then do you think our consciousness will fail there to analyze it?
Yeah,
I
I think the limitations of your mind are the limitations of your brain and your body.
Okay.
I think. I mean, there's another way of interpreting your question, which is, of course, we can think about things that are beyond what we can perceive, right? And we can, theoretical physics is all about stuff you can't see. So you can think about aliens. I can ask you questions about what happens inside a black hole, right? Which we won't be able to perceive. So we can ask those kinds of questions. But I think in terms of, I think looking at the world, we're limited by our sensory capacities, and of course, like going back to that, the sound a dog hears, we won't be able to hear it, but we can sort of figure it out through science, right? Through theories, through testing things. So it's not just that we're shackled to our sensory perceptions.
Okay.
But I think in terms of detecting things, we seem to be at least indirectly shackled to them. So we are limited beings, right? I think. Yeah,
I get it. So again, so this thing, the consciousness of human brain mind. So when a person is fully conscious, let's say when he goes to any person when he goes to sleep at 10 p.m. wakes up at 5 a.m. and if you ask that person where were you at 2 a.m. So since when the person went for sleep, he was on bed. When he woke up at 5 a.m., he was on bed. So he would say, I was on bed. But was he really there based on his consciousness? Because when he was sleeping, he was not conscious. So how would he respond to that, whether he was there or not? So his body was there, but his consciousness at that time was not there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. So one thing I would say is there's still, not always, but if you're dreaming, you have phenomenal consciousness. So subjective.
I wanted to come on that, but I'll ask this question of dreaming later, if you can tell this without dreaming.
Yeah, so say going to bed's a good example. Also, say I was playing sport and I got knocked out for 10 minutes.
Okay.
And then the question is, where were you?
Yeah.
And I want to say I was there on the field, lying on the grass. Yeah. But I don't see why there's an interesting philosophical question here. So is the question what happens to you as a person, or what happens to your consciousness?
My question was about consciousness.
Well, the neurons aren't firing in the right way, so you don't have a conscious experience. It doesn't go anywhere, right? You just don't have it.
Okay. And what if I'm dreaming at that time? I'm
then
in a different world.
Then so if you have like REM sleep where you're dreaming, then there is a certain level of neural activity. So I think as a physicalist, your neurons are firing in a certain way. You have conscious experience, and then something happens, and then your neurons stop firing in that way. So your consciousness sort of peters out.
Okay.
And then once the activity gets back online, as it were, then you start to become conscious again. Okay. So it's not like there's this magic thing that is there and that disappears. It's just more, again, it's if you think of the mind and the brain and the body as the same thing, it's just changes to your brain are causing changes to your consciousness. So when you are sleeping and you're not dreaming, arguably your brain's not doing what it does to generate consciousness during that time. So it's not that the consciousness goes somewhere else, it's just not there, I think, and then it comes back on again. I mean, it's a clunky metaphor, but that's, I think, how it works.
Okay, so it has to do with the body. So if I generalize the statement, tell me whether it will be correct or not. So if you are thinking,
Mhm.
you have consciousness. Can I say that?
I mean, I think there's a difference. Like back to the kind of idea about thought and consciousness. But
Yeah.
let's go with this for now. If you
Yeah.
if you're thinking,
If you can think, then you have a consciousness.
I'm a little bit reluctant to say yes because again, what we consider thinking is a very broad concept.
Mhm.
And do you think your computer thinks?
Uh, Not really. I mean, it's just based on codes and everything. It's following the commands. It
What
is
ab-
doing some preset of rules,
Yeah.
which is it has asked to do. It's not bringing out something new.
Yeah. What about like an AI system?
I mean, again, AI is something again based on data. It has done some
Yeah.
learning based on the data. So again, it
Yeah.
has limitations.
Yeah.
It can't bring something new which it has not been fed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of that's what people are like too, right? But I think on most of the time, if you're thinking, you're conscious. It's just I think the term thinking is also quite broad. So some people are okay, unlike you, maybe to attribute thought to AI systems, but I'm reluctant to say they're conscious. So you tell me. Maybe my answer is you tell me what you think thinking is, and then I can give you an answer to whether thinking always involves consciousness.
Although I'm not saying anything,
Yeah.
my eyes are closed, but my brain is working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in most cases for us as humans, our thinking and consciousness often are wrapped together. Um, but you might create thinking beings which don't have consciousness. That's my point. And it ultimately depends on what thinking is, because
Mhm.
you were saying something like a computer that's using data fed to it, using basically code,
Yeah.
right? Is not a thinking thing. I'm sympathetic to that idea, but if you stretch it and think about an AI that's kind of self-learning, um, it's not clear to me that humans are doing anything more when like we like to think we're unique, but it's not. I mean, I don't know is the answer, but if you think of, I think partly the issue is we don't have a good idea of how the mind works.
Mhm.
And the question I guess I would ask anyone is, if you're interested in a question like, can AI have consciousness or think, what's the order of explanation? Should we understand thought first by understanding human thought and then apply that to AI, or should we understand thought first using computers and then apply it to the human case? Because
I think the second case.
and I think that's
Yeah.
we've always so historically people thought the mind was like a steam engine because that's the technology they had at
Yeah.
the moment at that time. And nowadays some people, so like a lot of AI actually is like based on connectionist networks,
Mhm.
right? So a lot of philosophers even in the 60s, 70s, 80s were interested in connectionist networks, not just because they were useful in an applied sense, but whether we can understand the mind in a similar way. So if you say thought, what's the nature of human thought? You might actually say we have a connectionist network in our brains that when activated in the right way is what generates thinking. And there's an attractiveness to the picture, at least superficially, because a connectionist network basically resembles superficially a neural network. So your neurons are firing in a certain way, and the nodes in the connectionist network are firing in the switched on and off in the right kind of way. It's sending signals. So an AI system, like even something like ChatGPT, it kind of learns, right? And it kind of even learns your preferences and the way your way of speaking.
Yeah.
It's not clear to me that when you meet someone new, they're not doing the same same thing inside their heads. So again, I'm not
But
sure what the answer
again,
is
that
there.
learning, that machine learning, will be based on some set of datas, right? And
Yeah.
that output will always be influenced by the kind of data it has been exposed to.
Yeah.
But for like human learning, it could be something which it has not been learned or been exposed to.
I don't know is the answer. I'm
Okay.
very sympathetic to the idea that I think it's still machine learning in some.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think so. I think what you're grasping at maybe is like something like creativity,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
we can arguably think about something new that a AI system can't. That's the argument.
But I won't be absolutely correct on that, because now even in the AI, there's a lot of things which the creative people, the creative job, which you can ask from the AI, and it can give you that as well.
Yeah.
But again, that's based on the data's and learning, so it's influenced by that.
But yeah, but I mean, it's not my area, and I'm
Yeah.
torn to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
But like, so let's just change the subject a little bit, just if
Okay.
it helps or not.
Yeah.
So think about music,
Okay.
and you can have an AI generated piece of music. So you can say, I think I've heard this on YouTube. So you create a new AI song that sounds like Nirvana.
Okay.
So it has Kurt singing. It's got all the other two members, bass and drum lines, and it's created a new song. But to my ears, it just sounds terrible. It sounds mediocre. It sounds derivative. It's not interesting. But maybe at some point it will become good. Now the question is it doing something creative and new, or is it just creating like a fabric of what it's already been fed before? It's kind of aping stuff, right? But then what did Kurt Cobain do? I mean, he was probably riffing on his influences by like the Beatles, the Melvins, and all these kinds of bands. So it's not clear to me that there's something different that's happening in the AI case that happens in the human case. So again, I think partly to me, as someone who's a philosopher, we're interested in concepts. And I think the concept like creativity is so broad, we don't have a good answer to what creativity is. And I think for me, a lot of the musicians that I love, they had influences, and especially early on in their career, it really shows. And then the more you develop your sort of artistry, the more you change. And I don't think it's fundamentally a different thing that's happening in the AI case. It's just at the moment it's happening in a cruder way. But I think human creativity comes from us being fed information from our environment and the stuff you read. And actually, there's something kind of related, and it's by David Byrne, who's the Talking Heads singer, and he wrote a book on music. I forgot the name. And he talks about scenes. And his whole idea is like, when you look at the history of music, interesting advances in music happen when you had scenes, when you had a bunch of people doing things together, and you can sort of feed off each other. So again, it's being skeptical about this idea of like the kind of the artists by themselves, so the kind of genius that's suddenly out of nowhere coming up with a brilliant idea. And it goes back to the kind of Greek thing too. I think maybe at that point there were a lot of interesting people hanging out together and feeding off each other, but ultimately they're giving each other data points to work with, right?
Talking about music, since you have also experience with this thing, do you think, based on your experience, the taste of music changes when you get to know about the background of the person who has made that music?
I think so, and I think the taste definitely changes, but I think also, more controversially, here's what I'm not sure about, but I'm sympathetic to it, is your phenomenology changes. So the way it sounds to you changes. So if you become very knowledgeable about music, or even if you learn an instrument, I think the way that instrument sounds to you suddenly slightly gets altered just by you learning that instrument.
Yeah. Okay.
And
that's your connection with that instrument.
Yeah, I think so. So I remember, I grew up being a drummer. I played drums, and for a long time I didn't play any other instrument. So when I listen to music, I don't think this is completely true, but it's almost like a gestalt where I can either hear the music or I can switch and I can pay attention to the drums. And the more I played, the more I could tell what, even without looking, what the drum kit would be like, how big the toms would be, and by the sounds. And then when I started to learn the guitar, I'm not a good guitarist, but I started to hear more what the guitars were, and I could sort of guess now this guitarist is using a pickup like this as opposed to this other pickup, which I didn't have before when I listened. So I think I think the guitar and the drums are kind of crude instruments, but just by learning those simple instruments, I think the same pieces of music sounded different to me after becoming more aware of those
Okay.
instruments. And I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
but you were asking really about taste.
I mean, for example,
yeah,
if I listen to different music, then when I get to know about, suppose I'm talking about any indie song, indie music. So when I get to know about the background music director, even the singer,
yeah,
their life, the background life, and which has been a lot of struggle, and then they came to a top level, making good notch
yeah,
music. At the same time, a music director or a singer who was born in a very affluent family, who got all the luxuries of making a good music, he's making good music though.
yeah,
But I don't know, it's my personal biasness. I tend towards listening the other guy
yeah.
who has made that music out of very limited resources. So, so I mean, is that okay? I mean, if
Well,
it
I think
changes,
I think it's
it's just
fine.
normal.
I'm guessing it. I mean, who knows? But but I think it's fine. But I think also it's probably quite common, right? I
Okay.
think your taste evolves, and I do think I think in both senses it's romantic, right? So in one sense, the romantic view might be, look, who cares about the personal story? Like, there's a pure art form, the music, and we
Yeah.
can just listen to that, and we
Yeah.
don't think about anything else. But of course, our background beliefs inform our
Yeah.
taste, I think. And yeah, there's something quite romantic about the struggling artist. And if you actually find out that they were a trust fund kid who had every privilege thrown at them since a
Yeah.
young age, it
Yeah.
becomes less interesting. So, but again, I mean, part of me wants to say, who cares? It's the music. If the
Yeah.
music's good, but
Yeah.
then I do think, not in terms of phenomenology, but in terms of taste,
Hmm.
I do think we are interested, and I think often we like the underdog,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So,
Do you
yes.
think it's because somewhere down the line you have some relation from yourself, you try to relate yourself, and then how it influences your taste?
I think so. I'm sure. I mean, we are all seeing things from our own perspectives, and that's shaped by our backgrounds, right? But I think personally, at least, maybe it's a bigger conversation about identity politics, but I think I don't just want to see things or hear things from people with my background, right? I
Okay,
think
yeah.
what's interesting is if I can learn from people with different
Yeah,
backgrounds. So
yeah.
if you listen to music from different cultures, I think my life is enriched more by that than just listening to, say, Maldivian
Yeah,
music,
yeah.
for example.
I mean, I was talking about in
Yeah.
general the struggle, the story of that particular person, not coming from a particular culture. It could be a person from West and having a different upbringing.
Yeah.
But the struggle which is there, then that you relate.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, of course, it's easier to relate to, and I think especially when you're a teenager, I think you like music, especially music with lyrics, because no one understands you except this artist, and they're speaking directly to you, right?
Yeah.
And
And
so
you feel like, yeah, that's what I feel.
yeah,
what he's
exactly.
saying,
So I mean, think about the kinds of music we listen to as teens. It's often that kind of music that we think is speaking to us, and because it's tapping into something about what you think you're struggling with as a teenager, right?
Yeah.
So I think that does, to me at least, it does change your taste.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that was a very interesting conversation for the music. I have one more question from the earlier discussion that we were doing about the metaphysics thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned one thing about being a physicalist, that things come from within yourself, and then how you relates your consciousness from your brain and body.
Yeah.
So you're saying that things exist in your consciousness because you are there. If you don't exist, then there is no consciousness, right?
Yeah.
What if, can I say that your consciousness depends on the outside world? If there is no outside world, there is no consciousness.
Yeah, I think so. So I think both. I think the kind of consciousness that we care about, like human-like consciousness, it's a mixture of our bodies and brains, but also input from the environment, right? So think about the sort of philosophical idea of a brain in a vacuum. I don't think it has much going on, right?
Yeah.
So and there's an interesting idea, which is what happens if you don't have an external world, but you just have a body and a brain.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some kind of phenomenology because your heart's pumping, for example. There might be some sensation created by that, but then it would be a very minimal consciousness because it wouldn't have much, like what makes my life interesting, I think, is the things I see, the things I hear, the things I can taste. And if you're not getting any of those inputs, then it's not clear what you're getting. But then again, it's never clear if you can think about a brain and a body completely removed from the outside, because those sensory deprivation tanks, I've never done one, but I'm always curious about them. And I think one of the things they in theory, I think they block out all the sound.
Okay.
And it's completely dark, and you're just lying there. And I was reading an interview with someone who did that, and apparently you can hear very loudly the blood flowing through your veins. So you would still have
some connections with
some things
something is happening.
We might consider there's still data, sensory data, even
Yeah.
if it's coming from your body, you're still hearing something, and maybe you taste the saliva in your mouth, for example.
Yeah.
So those things are there. It's just, I think, ultimately, for us as people who are not in those tanks, our experience, our conscious experience, is formed by all these like lights flashing, all these colors we see, the air we breathe, all of those things. So I think I don't think there'll be much consciousness if you take away, in theory, all the senses. It's not. I mean, I don't even know how you would. You can have a thought experiment, but how would you physically do it? Because even in that deprivation tank, you're still getting some inputs, right? So that goes back to it's a philosophical idea, which is this: is the mind completely empty when you're born, or does it have something already there? So empiricists thought that we learn things from our environment, whereas I think rationalists thought actually there's things we know or we can reason about without having inputs from the environment. So it's this kind of philosophical theme, I think, and it's never clear which way you should go.
Okay. And also I noticed this thing, then a lot of religion, I mean, I take religion as a philosophy because being a student of philosophy, I take that as a philosophy, not as a religion sort of thing. So in a lot of religion, what they make consciousness as a very divine thing. In a lot of religions, it's there. For example, I mean, there's one pictorial representation in the older form of the Hinduism religion. So in that, there is a picture where Lord Vishnu is lying on serpents, and then there is a lotus coming out from his navel, and then on that lotus, one god, Lord Brahma, is sitting. So Lord Brahma is considered as the creator of the world, and when he's awake, that lotus comes out. Lord Brahma is there. When he sleeps, the navel closes, and the lotus, the Lord Brahma, who is the creator of the world, goes inside. So what that shows, that's the consciousness. If you're awake, then the world is for you. When you're sleeping, then sleeping is a representation. If there is no consciousness, then there is no world for you. So the existence of world also comes from your consciousness.
See, I would disagree with the last bit.
Okay.
That's the inference, I think, and that's what I do as a philosopher, is to say, so there's no world for you if you're not conscious. That's okay, right? You don't have any experience of the world, but it doesn't mean the world disappears.
Yeah, well, still there.
It's just that you're.
It's not for you.
You're not aware of it. I think it's just like I close my eyes and I can't see anything. It doesn't mean the world disappears. So I'm quite resistant to the kind of idealist picture where everything's an idea in your head. So I like the story till the last bit. So I don't think the world disappears. It just disappears for you.
Okay.
Right, I think. Yeah. So consciousness, when you die, there's no world for you, but it doesn't mean the world keeps going. Right.
So what do you think of salvation, nirvana?
Tell me more about what they mean.
So I mean, like in most of the philosophies, they talk about afterlife, and also the exiting the trap, or sometimes which we call matrix. So if you want to exit it from, in some philosophy they call it the trap of life and birth, life and death. So you're trapped in that circle. So if you want to escape that, so you need to achieve the state of enlightenment, which in different languages and different philosophy, they have different words, which is somewhere called salvation. So salvation, which in some philosophy, they talk about that this is the meeting of your consciousness to the divine consciousness, and then there is no form of you exist anywhere.
So would you use the word salvation and nirvana interchangeably?
Yes. I
Okay.
would,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really interesting idea, and
Mm.
there's, I mean, so much written about that. But again, as a physicalist, I don't think there's life after death. So I don't think there's no reincarnation, because there's
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
so there's nothing to escape in that way. But again, that's not to,
Mm.
like, I respect people who
Yeah,
have
yeah,
that
yeah,
view,
yeah,
as
yeah.
long as they're happy to respect my view, my view too.
Yeah.
So I don't. So to me, as a physicalist, the interesting question is not what happens with life after death and this chain of this cycle, but why do we think that?
Yeah.
What makes, so it's more of an anthropological question. Why do some cultures have this idea of reincarnation? Why do other cultures don't? And what role has reincarnation played in our evolutionary history? This idea of reincarnation. So I'm really interested in religion in the sense, in a kind of a physicalist way, which is, why do we have it, and why has it been such a successful cultural thing across different cultures? We have religion, and one answer to me, and this is why I'm quite sympathetic to religious viewpoints, and it kind of, I think it's so my friend Tim Crane, who's a philosopher of mine, but he wrote a book about religion, and I think this is quite similar to what he says. So think about someone like Dawkins, or these kind of atheists in America, the Four Horsemen. I think there's four of them. Sam Harris is one, and they are kind of criticizing religion and theism because they think it's metaphysically incorrect. And I share their view. I think I don't believe in life after death, but I think to criticize people or religion for that is to miss the point of religion. So to me, religion is important, partly at least, because of ritual. And humans and human-like, I think, species had ritual way before kind of agriculture and things. So even Neanderthals, there's like burial sites and things like that. So ritual seems to be really important for our species. And whether God exists or not, whether there's an afterlife or not, we do these things, and they create meaning. And I think when you don't have religion, there's a vacuum that you need to fill some other way. And it's very hard for us to fill that vacuum, because a lot of our communities are driven by these ritual settings. And I remember, so my granddad passed away last year, and I went to the Maldives, and we had a funeral. And I remember talking to someone from America afterwards, and she had her father die, and she was an atheist, and I'm an atheist too. So we buried him in the kind of Islamic tradition, but also Islamic tradition within the Maldives, which is, again, religions differ in the adaptation across cultures. But it was very meaningful to me, even as someone who doesn't buy into the afterlife, to bury him in that way, because there's a script, and it gives you meaning. Because otherwise, if someone dies, you think, what do I do? Right, but there was a script in that culture to do it this way, and it brought people together, and it was one of the most important things I think that happened to me. It was really moving. So I'm just sharing that like personal story as a way of saying, I think you could be someone like me who's a physicalist who doesn't think there's an afterlife, but you could still think these religious systems are incredibly important for human life. And I think I don't think that's the only way we create meaning in our life, but it's definitely one really successful way that we as a species have created meaningful lives, is to have these ideas. And I think, back to your question, maybe something like enlightenment or nirvana, it's playing an important role, or at least trying to achieve that. And maybe it's tied to, I don't know, but tied to being moral, or tied to being a good person or something. Again, it's something,
a bit of motivation,
something above and beyond yourself again. And that's kind of what makes life meaningful for a lot of people, I think.
So people are taking that rituals as a way of life which they have developed over a period of time. And why it is working so easily, because don't you think it's giving the answer, a very easy answer to most of the philosophical questions without any arguments, and then people are convinced with it.
I mean, I don't know. I think, I mean, philosophers of religion give answers to these
No,
questions.
I'm not saying
You mean,
it's giving the answer.
yeah,
It's giving an answer which people buy it
yeah.
without arguing.
With-
Because it is coming from some set of levels which people have established that this is the extreme top point, so you
yeah.
can't question against the
Yeah.
authority.
No, yeah, I think they do, and I think like everyone thinks they were born into the right religion, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's so much like what a coincidence that you just happen to be born in the
Yeah.
place that has the right,
yeah.
or the right, born in the family that has the right religion,
Yeah,
right? That's
yeah.
such
Yeah.
a coincidence.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a bit silly, but again, I think I think religion plays more of a role than just this belief system. I think the metaphysics is important, these things you buy into, but to me, ultimately, religion is about community and
culture.
Culture, and finding meaning beyond that, and these habits like ritual that you have that again give you meaning, but also like I'm a bit skeptical about this idea that religion was invented to control. Like, because it would be really weird if there was like at some point these people got together and said, let's invent, let's come up with something
such rule of regulations.
And we'll come up with religion. It was, of course, it was a more organic
Yeah.
thing that came about. But one, I think, reason why we have it is it helps us navigate our social reality, which is we live with other people in communities. And how do you organize that? I think religion is one way, not the only way, of course, but one way to do it. And I think it has power in that. So, and I think the reason why a lot of people don't question their religious upbringing is the society that they're embedded in gives their lives meaning, and it works some way or the other. And then people start to question when it doesn't work for them. And again, and of course, those communities might not be for everyone. Like I grew up in an Islamic culture, and there's definitely parts of that culture I didn't like. But then there's a lot of that was tied to do with Maldivian culture that I didn't like. And now there's parts of the culture I love and parts which I don't. And I think what's good, is you can sort of choose which things you like and which things you don't. And I think to me, to be religious as a non-religious person would be, I guess, similar. You choose which parts of your religion you think speaks to you, and you can you can refrain from adopting the ones you don't. And these days you're always navigating your way within your religion, right? So think about something like gay marriage. On some crude interpretations of most of the religious texts, that's not a good thing, but a lot of theists are completely on board with that. So you can kind of interpret these texts, I think, partly the way you like, because it's always a push and pull, which things you adopt and which things you actually say, well, this is not really a part of my religion, or it's not important to me that we do it this particular way. So I don't think there's this kind of script that you apply. I think it's much more you take bits and it's not a rigid thing. I think it's an evolving thing.
During your answer, you mentioned one thing about yourself being atheist. I'm agnostic. So when I meet any atheist person, so this is one of my very common question, which I generally ask. I would like to ask you as well.
Yeah.
I mean, why I consider myself as agnostic? Because I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's why I say.
Yeah.
But if you say anything, when you say no to anything, then that no implies that you are acknowledging the existence of yes. So when you say, okay, I'm a theist, then it means I'm acknowledging there is something exist which is called as theist.
Like a god or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm saying, no, I don't believe in that. But at the same time, when I'm saying no to it, then I'm also acknowledging there is something. That's why I'm saying it no. But if I'm saying I don't know, then I am not acknowledging whether it is there or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah. So I think it's partly to do with certainty. Right. So how can you be certain that there's no being or no?
Because you are taking a very firm stand, right?
Yeah.
So it means you are certain.
Yeah. And as certain as I'm a philosopher, right? So I don't think anything's 100%. But no, I think it's a good question, and I think to me, I hate this word, but it's been a journey, right? It's not like one day I woke up and I lost my faith.
So definitely.
So I think I was agnostic for a long time, and I do think sometimes you can't be 100% certain, and you can't disprove the existence of something you don't think exists. That's too hard a thing to do. So maybe the reason why I say I'm an atheist and I don't believe in something instead of saying I don't know is there's a lot of things I don't 100% know, which I don't believe in, because I don't think I need to posit that to explain things. So it's a bit like, think about from a kind of a scientific perspective. You only posit what you need to explain the natural world. And historically, I think we did need to posit something like a god or something like that to explain things we couldn't. And now I think we are pretty good at explaining what we would consider mysteries. So why do you need to posit this thing if you don't need to anymore? So, and then I think there's a lot of things I don't know for sure that they don't exist, but I have no reason to posit it, so I don't. So it feels almost like we make an exception for God. We are agnostic about a God, but we're not agnostic about other things. And I think I mean, this is a bit silly, but the whole flying spaghetti monster idea. Yeah. So I think partly it's been a while since I thought about this, but the idea is the world was created by this flying spaghetti monster. It's just you'll never see it. Yeah. And if you start to question its existence, it does things to your brain and all this kind of stuff.
You can't do that, yeah.
So the premise is there's a flying spaghetti monster that we just can't detect ever. It's in its nature that we can't detect it. Now, I can't prove to you for certain that it doesn't exist, but I'm not agnostic about the flying spaghetti monster. I'm an atheist about it. I don't think it exists. And the reason is I have no reason to posit the flying spaghetti monster. And now think about a divine being. The same thing applies for me. I don't see personally a need to posit it. I can't disprove it, and I might be wrong. I'll be in a lot of trouble if I'm wrong, but I might be wrong, and that's okay. I'm as a philosopher, I'm happy to say that. Of course, I'm all about epistemic humility, our ability to be wrong about things. But saying that, the reason I would say I'm an atheist and not an agnostic is there's so many things I don't believe in that I would say I'm an atheist about, and I would add a divine being to that list. But in fairness, I think maybe we should be agnostic about all of those things, maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe, So I think either be agnostic about all of those things, or be an atheist about all of those things. So
yeah, that's absolutely fair.
Yeah. But I also think just to defend the agnostic, I remember readings, I can't remember where it was, but I think some people think, you have to pick a side at some point, right? And I think that's silly.
It's a grey zone, isn't it? It cannot be black and white always.
Yeah, and I think agnosticism is a completely legitimate position you're allowed to hold till you die if that's what you want to buy into. And ultimately, I think, not agnosticism within just religion, but in general, I think it's on the whole, quite a reasonable position to hold, because there's we can't be certain, I think, almost about anything, right? So it's based on degrees, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the conversation, whatever we had. And before finishing this conversation, there's one last question that I have that I would like to ask you. So this again comes from what you were telling about, that the consciousness comes from the human brain body. It's inward to outward, like it's coming from inside, and then you have that consciousness. Being a student of science, there is something called quantum entanglement. So that theory says that at quantum levels, there is a relation of, let's say, inside electron, if there is a movement, it could be influenced by an electron from a different galaxy.
Yeah.
And they are interconnected, and their connection is much faster than the speed of light. The human thoughts, which you are having in your brain, the consciousness that you are having, as you mentioned, if it's coming from a firing from a neuron, maybe is there a possibility that firing which is happening in your neurons, in that electron, is not because of your consciousness, but maybe because of something happening in a different parallel world or whatever different galaxy, and from there that's quantum entanglement is happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting idea. Didn't Einstein call it spooky action at a distance?
Yeah.
So I don't know, I find it fascinating, and I have a hard time getting my head around it. But maybe this is more of a question for you. So it's an interesting idea. Like, so what happens with consciousness? But as I understand it, this stuff is happening at the quantum level, which is not at the level of neurons, right?
Okay.
So just because something's happening at the quantum level doesn't mean you can zoom out and assume it happens in the neural level. So of course it's possible. Your question is it possible? I'm guessing if quantum entanglement happens, my neurons are made up of smaller entities, right? So there might be quantum entanglement within the I don't even know what level it happens in, whether it's at quarks or at...
Yeah, I think the quarks is the smallest level that we have at the moment.
At the moment, right? So if it's happening at the quark level, it doesn't mean it's noticeable at the level of neurons. So it's not clear if it will make any difference.
Okay.
But who knows? Like, maybe if enough stuff happens at the quantum level, maybe it happens at the macro level. But normally, I mean, the reason why non-quantum physics at a more macro level works is because the quantum stuff doesn't affect it at that. So that's why quantum physics was a discovery, right? But so I think, of course it's possible, but I need more for an explanation to think our conscious experiences are shaped by quantum entanglement. But I'm just going to add one more thing to it, and this is not really directly what you said, but you brought up something, which is how do we explain consciousness? And this one idea is we haven't been able to explain consciousness because we've been lacking the knowledge of the quantum level. And maybe quantum physics, when we know more about that area, we can solve the problem of consciousness. And I'm a bit skeptical about that. I think the right explanation will be found at the neurobiological level, not at the deep quantum level. And I think maybe this is a little bit unfair, but I think people are making this inference, which is, look, there's this mystery consciousness, but there's this other mystery, the quantum level, quantum physics. Maybe those two mysteries are related, but I don't, besides those two things being mysterious, I don't think one will directly explain the other, or at least I would like to see more being said as to why knowledge of quantum physics can actually tell us anything about the more macro phenomena of human consciousness.
Okay, that is still something to be studied in future, and we need more evidence for that, more scientific results, and then I think it could be probably something could be established later. Yeah, so pretty much that's it. I think we talked about quite a few interesting things that people come across and they still struggle to understand. And I guess based on our conversation, what I learned from your conversation, it was very insightful. And I hope the same, our audience who's be listening this thing, they would get the insights of these deep concepts of metaphysics and philosophy. So Dr. Raamy Majeed, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Gaurav. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I think there are a few more topics which I would love to explore with you in future, because as you mentioned about the music, which is very interesting topic for me, and you have expertise on that as well. So maybe in future we can come up with that and have some discussion on that as well.
Sounds good.
All right. So thank you very much.
Thank you.